just gonna set it up. Keep flying. I was just waiting for those horns. Should be coming soon, right? What you feeling down for? No, I like that. I like that.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake
Listen.
up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Look around and then I see a little old man and a homeless lady. They don't have no food to eat. Father, give them a warm place to sleep. Come on, wake up the people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Family greetings, it's Brother Jegna again, bringing you another Afrocentricity book show. Every Sunday between 4 and 6 p.m. we go through the best books, the best lectures, best speeches, best essays. Yeah, we do it through the eyes of African peoples. His African-centered view of the world. Must remember, Glass Are Us are our sponsors. Glass Are Us has 7307 Sisters Road, N15. Please go to Glass Are Us for all your glazing needs. So whether it's glass repairs, double glazing, shelving, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, shower cubicles, any of your glazing needs, please go to Glass Are Us. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. And that is 0208 800 6663. Please go to Glass Are Us, 7307 Sisters Road, N15 for all your glazing needs. If you mention the Afrocentricity book show, you get a nice 10% discount. So, what are we doing this Sunday? We've been reading for the past few weeks the great book called The Black Jacobins by the author C.L.R. James. C.L.R. James, The Black Jacobins. We are now moving through nicely. We're on chapter 7. Last week we finished chapter 6, which was about the rise of Toussaint. Toussaint Louverture was the first great leader who rose in the island, which at that time was called San Domingo from the Spanish, and they in fact freed themselves from enslavement. It's a great story. In 1804 a new nation became Haiti, but originally it was called Saint Domingo or Santa Domingo. So at the moment what's happened on the island is that the French Revolution broke out, and there was chaos on the island, and the mulattoes, which we would today we might call the mixed race people, wanted their rights, and they rose up. The whites rose up. There's rich whites and poor whites. There was the people from France itself, the whites. There was the Creole French who were born on the island, and they all had their own vested interests, and they was fighting each other. And the Africans said, well, it's our time now to rise up now. These people are going crazy off, not even taking any notice of us, but all of them want us enslaved. And that's when the Africans rose up themselves. There was an excellent festival or a secret meeting at a place called Case Baison. And they read there, Bookman, he read the famous Bookman speech, or the Bookman prayer. So you need to, if you just Google Bookman's prayer, you'll see a great speech where he inspired everybody to rise up from their enslavement. So I'm going to start with this week with chapter 7, and chapter 7 is called The Mulattoes, as today we'll call mixed race. The Mulattoes Try and Fail. The reason why I love the Haitian Revolution is that we learn so much. We learn so much. There's so many lessons for us to learn, which will help us not only today and help us in the future. So anyway, chapter 5, my apologies, chapter 7, the mulattoes try and fail. So eminence engenders enemies. The white revolutionary royalists had long ago marked down Toussaint as enemy number 1, after giving a list of the most dangerous Republicans. One of them singled him out for his special attention. As for Toussaint, he is the great papa. But the whites were no longer a force in Santo Domingo. The potential rulers were the mulattoes, and the mulattoes saw in this growing reputation a friendship of the black leader with Leveur, a threat to the domination they considered theirs by right. Mulattoes and some free blacks filled most of the important posts in the troops, other than those commanded by Toussaint himself, in the municipalities and the general administration. Villate, the commander of Le Cap was one of the major cities. The commandant of Le Cap was a mulatto. The mulattoes of the south were under the leadership of Rigaud, Bouvet, and Pinochet, who were harassing the British and building up a mulatto state. So let me say the British came from Jamaica. The British actually entered the island as well to try and, in fact, get themselves there to rule the island. They was hoping the French, but I was hoping that the French would come over to their side as well. So the British opportunities, as you may realise, came to the island hoping they could take control of the island, because San Domingo was the richest colony of all the colonies in the world. It produced 50% of all France's income. So the mulatto ex-slaves were glad to attach themselves to the leaders of their caste who needed numbers. In the West Province, however, the mulattoes were a problem. Most of the rich property proprietors joined the British. But the French planters who had negotiated with Williamson had abjured the decree of April the 4th. After all the oratory and pamphleteering, who cared about that now? Nothing would satisfy these but the colony as it was before. Williamson hinted to the British government that if he could only be given authority to enforce the provisions of the Negro Code, he would conquer the colony at once. Dundas refused. Williamson, on the spot no doubt, felt that you could make the promises, conquer the colony, and then get out of obligations. Dundas seemed to think that a few thousand reinforcements would be sufficient to defeat the black brigands, without promising any dangerous successions or concessions. But despite these rebuffs, the mulatto proprietors remained on the whole uneasily pro-British. Whenever Toussaint captured the area, following his usual policy, he welcomed them if they took the oath of allegiance to the Republic. But as soon as his back was turned, they would intrigue and plot to get the British back. The first great attack on St. Mark suffered from the treachery of the mulattoes, and in St. Mark, Mirabelais, Veretz, and the whole Artibonite district They were the chief support of the British, who without them would have been driven out long before 1798. They caused Toussaint to lose many of his most important captures. What has been my surprise today to learn that the rebels of St. Mark and those of Mirabelais have taken from us Verrates and several other posts and obliged our people to fall back. This reverse has befallen us only owing to the perfidy of the men of colour in the district. Never have I experienced so many treasons, and I take an oath that henceforth I should treat them in a manner very different to that which I have done hitherto. Whenever I have made them prisoners, I have treated them like a good father. The ungrateful wretches have replied by seeking to deliver me to their enemies. After a great deal of intrigue with Republicans inside the large and beautiful districts of Mirabelais, Toussaint was successful, and informed Louvet with great joy that he was now in possession, without shedding any blood, always a great point to him. Alas, a few weeks afterwards his garrison was driven out. The mulattoes have deceived him again. In time he lost patience. These rascals conspire more than ever. There is a conspiracy. You must know that a man of colour is at the head of it. The mulattoes would abandon Toussaint's army during an engagement and join the enemy. Scoundrels, rogues, rascals. Toussaint does not restrain himself. They spread the news that Toussaint wished to deliver the country to the English. All the hatred of these scoundrels is directed against me. It is by such impostures that they excite the people. But later, a new note crept into his complaints. The enemies of liberty and equality have sworn to do away with me. I am to perish in some ambush that they propose to lure me into. Let them trap me well, for if they miss me, I will not spare them. These gentlemen say that it is necessary at all costs to get rid of me. One conspiracy, he says, was Chanlade at his head, and Chanlade was an officer of the Republican army. Toussaint, ex-slave, with his army of ex-slaves led by ex-slaves. The most powerful force in San Domingo was essentially the man of the black labourers, and not only the mulattoes who were hanging around the British, but even the mulattoes who were Republicans who were watching this threat to themselves in the close intimacy between Toussaint and Leveur, and Leveur's interest in and the popularity of the black masses. This was no question of colour, but crudely a question of class. For those blacks who were formerly free to the mulattoes, persons of some substance and standing under the old regime, they looked upon the ex-slaves as essentially persons to be governed. Leveur loved the blacks for their own sake. He loved Toussaint for all the services he had rendered, and because he was Toussaint. His reports to the minister are filled with their praises, but he loved them too because he was afraid of the mulattoes and saw them as a counterweight to mulatto power. The mulattoes felt that they could govern the country themselves. Let me say that the mulattoes, obviously African blood, but European fathers for the most part, many of them had wealth, property. They lived in the south of the island, and they lent the whites money, and that's why the whites hated them, because they hated that they had, they thought they were superior to us, because they had money and wealth and power. But the mulattoes, sadly, because of the mind of the people and the mind of the world at that time, they did not get the rights they believed they should have, the rights of what their father would have, the Europeans. So they hated, in one level, the black blood in their veins, because that stopped them from getting the rights, and they hated the whites who stopped them from getting their full rights, because the whites obviously hated them because of their black blood in their veins. So the mulattoes, they always intrigue to get power for themselves. They'll go to the British, they'll go to the French, they'll go to Toussaint. Sadly, they'll do anything they could to get power. So I continue. So the mulattoes felt that they could govern the country themselves. They were aiming at independence, and some of the local whites conspired with them. These mulatto citizens, Laver warned the minister, wished to dominate all, wished to have all places, wished to enjoy everything themselves. The mulattoes and the former free blacks of Le Cap could not bear to see an ex-slave do well in business or hold any position. Vilate filled the National Guard of Le Cap with mulattoes, put former slaves in prison, discarded Lever's orders, wrote him insulted letters, and intrigued with the mulattoes in the South. If Rigaud would have communicated with me, the colony would have been saved a long time ago, Laver heard of these similar remarks by Vilate. Laver heard these and similar remarks and begged the minister for help. The chiefs, who were formerly slaves, are the support of liberty and the republic. I am firmly in the opinion that without them there would have already been a large movement for independence. The constant threat of the mulattoes while having to fight against the British was wearing Laver down. I have been compelled through the love of my country, for my fatherland, to stand it all with a patience beyond the humans, but he could not stand it much longer. His headquarters were at Port de Paix. In July 1795, the convention concluded peace with Spain, and in October instructed Laver to make Le Cap his headquarters. Vilate had been master of Le Cap for 3 years now, and Laver, the governor and commander-in-chief, was coming to reduce him and his fellows to a subordinate position. When Laver arrived, he liberated the Africans from the prisons. Many mulattoes were living without paying rent in houses deserted by former owners. Perrault, the treasurer, assessed the houses and made them pay, and they raised a cry of tyranny. Things were coming to a head. Early in 1796, Pinachat and a colleague of his, on their way to Paris, came to Le Cap. Instead of going to Paris, Pinachat, busying himself in Le Cap, was introduced to the barracks, where he addressed the soldiers. He wrote numerous letters to the South, and then went back to the South to establish an alibi. If Laver's intimacy with Toussaint and admiration for him had a sound political basis, Toussaint's intimacy with Laver and admiration for him had the same. Nothing ever escaped Toussaint. He had been watching the manoeuvres of the mulattoes and of Vilate for a long time, from the very beginning of his association with Laver. After he had been appointed commander of the West Cordon, he had banteringly asked Colonel Pierre Michel, an ex-slave, why he had not kept him informed of Vilate's intrigues at Le Cap. During the next 2 years, Toussaint and Vilate clashed. Vilate complained to Laver that Toussaint prohibited the proprietors from selling their coffee to Le Cap. Toussaint indignantly denied the charge and enclosed a batch of correspondence to produce its falsehood. I believe you too just, General, not to suspend your judgment, and I hope that you do not believe me capable of having committed such a fault. If Vilate had been one of my true friends, he would have acquainted me with the charges which were brought to him against me, in spite of the fact that my brothers in Le Cap, Francois, intrigues against me in this way. I have nothing to say against them. I regard them always as brothers and friends. By the grace of God, time will make you know the right. Toussaint was always careful of his reputation. If he did not have a virtue, he assumed it. Yet in the case of his indignation and sanctimoniousness seemed justified. When the mulattoes betrayed Toussaint called them scoundrels. He cursed the royalists, the British and the Spaniards. But despite the intrigues going on all around and the intimacy of the letters, there is not a single malicious insinuation against anybody. All of his life he strove for conciliation with enemies and peaceful settlement in all disputes. But he was not the man to be caught napping. He had his agents in Le Cap. In early March he knew that the mulatto conspiracy was ripe and might burst at any moment. Why else should he write Levay the following letter 2 days before the 20th? In speech marks, "Yes, Captain, yes, General, Toussaint is your son. You are dear to him. Your tomb will be his, and he will support you at peril of his life. His arm and his head are always at your disposal, and if ever you should happen to fall, he will carry it with the sweet consolation of having defended his father, his virtuous friend, and in the cause of liberty." Yet it is pretty certain that he told Laveur nothing of his suspicions for Laveur, though aware of the attention, was taken quite surprised. At 10 o'clock in the morning of March the 20th, Laveur was sitting in his bedroom in Le Cap, talking to another officer. Suddenly 6 or 8 persons rushed in, all mulattoes. Not a Negro, not a white man. He thought it must be some quarrel that they wanted him to judge. Instead, the intruders showered curses and blows upon him. His aide-de-camp rushed to his assistance, but the attackers arrested Laveur and other officers. And the aide-de-camp, that's his bodyguards, Laveur was in slippers, and in the struggle, they slipped off. They slipped off his feet. Barefooted and bareheaded he was. The mulattoes dragged the governor by the hair and by the arm to the prison. Perrault, the treasurer, was already there. For 2 days they stayed in prison, without seeing anyone and without any assistance. At 8 o'clock on the second day, the municipality came to Laveur. Said it was in a state of despair at his arrest, which was abominable, etc., etc., and that it hoped to get him out in a short while. But the municipality was in the plot also. As soon as Levay was arrested, it decreed that Levay and Perrault had lost public confidence. It named Villet's governor of San Domingo. Villet wrote to Pagel, the military commander of the north, and to Casa Calvo of the Spanish San Domingo to inform them of the new appointment. But the conspiracy never had the slightest chance of success. The ubiquitous Toussaint had been watching it develop, and had his men on the spot. Pierre Michel commanded a battalion at Fort Liberty, near Le Cap. Pierre Michel had come from Africa in a slave ship and worked as a slave. He had been released by the revolution. He could not read or write, but had risen from the ranks to become a colonel. He was a good soldier, dictated clear and concise reports, and then traced over in ink the signatures which had been written for him to pencil. He was a man of great promptitude, daring and ambition, with a gift for intrigue. While keeping in touch with Toussaint against Villet, he was himself plotting against Toussaint, aiming at mastery of the North himself. Such were the men created by 5 years of revolution. As soon as Michel heard of the news of Levay's arrest, he understood what was afoot. He grouped those officers who were faithful to the government under himself. He wrote at once to inform Toussaint, who was at Gonzales, 75 miles away, and instructed all the black chiefs in the neighborhood to call out the armed laborers and march on Le Cap to deliver their friend Levay. He arrested a courier of Levates, found on him a list of 6 names, and sent the list to Toussaint, his superior officer, to take action. The black masses in the town, called by the friends of the government, ran through the streets crying, "Power to the law! Power to the law!" Toussaint was at Gonaïves when he got the news of the coup d'etat. What? He wrote to Levay, they have the audacity to threaten you and to take up arms against you? What are they aiming at? They will go back to their duty, or I shall take 1,000 lives for me. I will take 1,000 lives for one. He dispatched 2 big battalions to march on the city. One of them under the dreaded Dessalines. He wrote menacing letters to places where he suspected Villiers might have supporters, and these letters were sufficient to keep the would-be revolutionaries quiet. He addressed one of his flaming proclamations to the citizens of Le Cap. In disrespecting the governor, you disrespected France. What will be the mother country say when she learns of your irregular proceedings towards the representatives? Cast a glance at the districts of Artibonite, and see the unheard of cruelty which the English practice on your brothers. Some are embarked on boats and drowned in the sea, and the rest are branded on the cheeks and chained as galley slaves. That's the British. Even the women of colour are obliged to abandon their homes and hide in the woods to save themselves from the barbarity of your enemies. You, on the contrary, you can live peaceably in your houses. But no, you sow confusion. A few days after he himself arrived in Le Cap at the head of his personal cavalry guard. But by this time, the insurrection was half over. Louvet had been released, and Villiers had fled from Le Cap with a small body of personal supporters. The black masses in the town and country were solid for Louvet. Toussaint triumphed, fought for peace. He sent a deputation to Villiers, inviting him to come back to Le Cap. And the deputies left, accompanied by 100 black women. Villiers told them that he hoped Louvet would be murdered by those very blacks to whom he was showing so many favours. However, he agreed to meet Toussaint, but wanted Toussaint to come out to him. Toussaint, suspecting an ambush, refused to go. Meanwhile, the black women who accompanied the deputation had listened to the insinuation of Villiers' soldiers, and hurrying back to Louvet's headquarters outside Le Cap, they ran all over town shouting that Louvet and Perrault and had 2 ships in the harbour, loaded with chains to throw the Negroes again into slavery. So if you notice, there's dozens upon dozens of different interested parties, and they're all trying to manipulate other people by lies. Everybody's seeking their own power. Immediately the soldiers who had supported Louvet surrounded his house, calling for his blood. They were going to murder him when Toussaint appeared before the crowd. Led it towards the main state store, opened the doors, and showed them that there was no chains. The blacks were satisfied as much as the practical demonstration as by their confidence in Toussaint, a general, a black, and ex-slave like themselves. But although the insurrection was stifled, Louvet, knowing the weakness of his position, would not take punitive measures. Blockading Le Cap were 12 British and 2 American ships. The mulatto leaders were obviously still ready for insurrection. Louvet suspected a plot and had to do all he could to prevent an insurrection which might have had the collusion of the British. The mulattoes were clamouring that the power should be shared, and one man should not have it all. On the 1st of April, Louvet, accompanied by Toussaint, went into Le Cap and assembled the people and the army on the parade ground. He knew that the mulattoes were expecting him to make some alteration to the government in their favour, reinstating Villiers with greater powers. But to the astonishment of all, the unbounded joy of the blacks, he proclaimed Toussaint's assistant to the governor, and swore that he would never do anything without consulting him. He called him the saviour of constituted authority, the black Spartacus, the Negro predicted by Renal, who would avenge the outrages done to his race. Toussaint, overwhelmed with gratitude, coined one of his flying phrases, "After God, Louvet." French historians date the elevation of Toussaint above the mulattoes and French representatives in the minds of the blacks from this memorable day, and not without commendation of Lavey. It is a privilege of the historians to be wise after the event, and the more foolish the historian, the wiser he usually aims to be. Lavey could not help himself. Toussaint wanted to dismiss Velay. The Dominican Catechism says to pardon our offensive, Lord, as we shall pardon those who have offended us. But in an army, no subordination, no discipline. No discipline, no army. If the lieutenant is not subordinate to his captain, the sub-lieutenant, the sergeant and the soldier will not be subordinate either. That, at any rate, is what I think, General. Lavey will not take this step. He was afraid that civil war might lead to the loss of the colony, but he wrote to the minister explaining what he had done. By nominating Toussaint, he had checked the plans of those evilly disposed men. Lavey was certain that Rigaud was in a conspiracy also. The mulattoes had been blocked for the moment, but the French authority in the colony was in danger, and Lavey was very near a breakdown. Ah, citizen, he pleaded with the mulattoes, do not lose time. Send troops, a powerful force, send commissioners, send laws, and all that is needed to make them respected. Any more delay will make France lose the 4 years of labour and of fatigue that we, the true Republicans, have suffered. The French government, alarmed at the growth of the mulatto aspirations, hastened to send a commission, which landed in Le Cap on May the 11th, 1796. So this is a commission from France. It consisted of 5 men, Girard, Leblanc, and 3 who had played a part in San Domingo history: Raymond the mulatto, Roume, that's R-O-U-M-E, Roume, who was sent to take possession of the Spanish San Domingo, handed over to France by Spain in the Treaty of Bale, and our old friend Sonothax. Sonothax, luckily for himself, had arrived in Paris just after the fall of Robespierre. He had stood his trial and had been triumphantly acquitted of all the charges brought against him by the colonists. He was known to be a lover of the blacks, and France was now afraid not of the blacks but of the mulattoes. Sonothax came, therefore, with a special injunction to keep the mulattoes in check. He brought only 1,200. 1,200 men, but plenty of arms and ammunition. On August the 17th, 4 months after Sonothax landed, the Directory confirmed Toussaint's promotion by Laveur to the rank of General of Division, and that of Pierre Michel and other ex-slaves as generals of the brigade. France, still engaged in a life and death struggle in Europe, was leaning on the blacks not only against the British, but against the threat of mulatto independence. Thus, the stock of Toussaint as leader of the blacks was rising steadily. And that was the end of chapter 7. So, this is the Afrocentricity Book Show. This is Brother Jegna. We are reading The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. We'll be taking a short break shortly, but I'm going to continue. Okay, this is chapter 7. My apologies, it's chapter 8. The White Slave Owners Again. Sonothax. Obviously, Sonothax is sent from France, but he believes that the blacks maybe should have a level of freedom. Sonothax, as a dictatorial and self-willed as ever, dominated the commission and began to pronounce pro-black policy. He loved the blacks, said that he wished he was a black man, and lived openly with a mulatto woman. If all the whites had been like Sonothax, the labourers would have lost their anti-white feelings, by which they meant only anti-slavery. For Lavey and Sonothax, they would have done anything. But the blacks could not trust the old slave owners. Surprise, surprise. The British bribed, intrigued, and gave money and guns, and the insurrection all over the colony continued. Sonothax secretly wrote a directory that the blacks hated the whites, but he understood the reason for their hate. 3 weeks after he landed, he published a proclamation in Creole, which declared that everyone who was convicted of saying in the markets or elsewhere that the Negroes had not acquired their liberty forever, or that a man could be the property of another man, was a traitor to his country and would be punished accordingly. To reassure the people, so sensitive of their freedom, he abolished restraint for debt. He worked hard to instill in them the necessity for labour. Everybody is free in France, he said, but everybody works. Yet he stood firmly against the coercion. Work hard was his advice, but do not forget that no one has the right of forcing you to dispose of your time against your will. He rigorously forbade beatings on the plantations. He instituted schools where blacks were given an elementary education and learned Greek and Roman. He sent the sons of the blacks and mulattoes to France to be educated in a special school that the Republic opened for them. He announced that he would not deliver a commission to anyone who could not sign his name, and thus in every house in Le Cap could be seen black men and women, some 50 years of age, learning to read and write. In the country districts, the labourers begged Sonothax to send them as teachers, and even young European children who knew how to read and write. The blacks knew their ignorance and were willing to learn from the whites, to be guided by men from France, men like Leveille and Sonothax. All they asked was to be rid forever of the fear of slavery. But the British were there, spending millions to enslave them once more. Surprise, surprise. They knew that the old slave owners for whom they worked, now free men, would make them slaves again at the first opportunity. Their hope was Toussaint, a black man, ex-slave, with his army of black men, ex-slaves. All of the black labourers in San Domingo had their eyes on him. Toussaint, when Sonothax arrived, was second military rank to Leveille. He had the confidence of the French government, who had sent him presents of letters and congratulations, and undertook the education of his sons in Paris, with Leveille and Sonothax, his representative in San Domingo. He was on the best terms. The mulattoes in the north were discredited, and Toussaint, with his army and mass support, was the most powerful man in San Domingo. It is from this moment that dates his tentative ambition to become the master of the island. Many are convinced of this, but it is certainly a false view. What is certain is that Toussaint wanted to become commander-in-chief, and excuse me, and now with extreme delicacy he suggested to Leveille that he could help him to get back to France if he wished. The French Constitution of Year 3 had given San Domingo 7 deputies in the 2 houses. The elections were due to take place on September 1796, and in August Toussaint told Leveille, I must say, spelled Laveaux, so Toussaint told Leveille that he could not get him elected as a representative. Leveille had sacrificed his health, his wife, his children, and he needed to rest from the intrigues and factions of San Domingo. The excuse offered was perfect. Leveille had laboured in San Domingo through the years of the Revolution and the invasions by the British, without one trip to France. He had borne the brunt of the fighting, first against the slaves and then against the Spanish and British, as governor and commander-in-chief. His letters to the ministers show how much he had felt the strain, and he leapt at the chance. He at any rate did not suspect Toussaint's motives, or if he did, he bore him no grudge. They remained the closest of friends after Lavey's return to France. Their intimate correspondences continued, and Lavey was always Toussaint's staunchest defender. But Sonothax too. At this same election, though it took place only a few months after his arrival, had himself elected a representative in the colony, in the French Parliament. One of Toussaint's reasons for suggesting Lavey's return was to have a trustworthy representative of the blacks in France, and this was the very reason why Sonothax wanted to go back. The political situation had shifted in France since the abolition of slavery, without a debate, and the supporters of African liberty had a good cause to be nervous. Robespierre and the Mountain had maintained power until July 1794. The Terror had saved France. But long before July, Robespierre had gone far enough and was now lagging behind the revolutionary masses. In the streets of Paris, Jacques Vallée and Roux were preaching communism, not in production but in distribution, a natural reaction to the profiteering of the new bourgeoisie. Robespierre, however, revolutionary as he was, remained bourgeoisie and had reached the extreme limit of the bourgeoisie's revolution. He persecuted the workers. Far more workmen than aristocrats perished in this phase of the Terror. In June 1794, the revolutionary armies won a great victory in Belgium, and at once the continuation of the Terror was seen by the public as a factional ferocity and not a revolutionary necessity. Right wing and left in the convention combined to strike at the sinister dictator, and when he sent out the call to all the people, he could not get the old response. Some of the sections came, but there was a delay. Rain fell, and they went back home again. The revolutionary ardour, which had inspired them since August 1792, was gone, killed by Robespierre himself. He seems to have been in constant fear of a split between the extreme revolutionism of the Paris and the rest of the country, but destroyed his own left wing and thereby sealed his own doom. The tragedy was the Paris masses, in leaving him to his fate, were opening the door to worse enemies. Robespierre's successors were the new officialdom, the financial speculators, the buyers of church property, all the new bourgeoisie. They were enemies of royalties, which would guillotine them all if he came back, and avid of social equality, but were determined to keep the masses in their place and willing to ally themselves with the old bourgeoisie, even some of the aristocracy, in a joint exploitation of the new opportunities created by the revolution. When the masses grasped the trend of affairs, they tried twice in 1795 to reassert their old power, but the new bourgeoisie, France, was too strong for them. They were defeated, reaction increased, and as it grew, the old slave owners, crawling out of their prisons and hiding places, held up their heads again and clamoured for order to be restored in San Domingo and the colonies. On the morning after the convention had not been too happy over abolition, Robespierre seems to have doubted the utility of the colonies at all, and probably with the idea of bargaining with Britain, had let it be known that he did not want the colonial question raised, whereat all kept quiet. Lucky Sonothax, a Bressotin and therefore enemy of Robespierre, had arrived back in France before Robespierre's fell, and once more in danger of the guillotine. But with the death of Robespierre, the colonial question came to the fore again. Before the convention was dissolved, Bossy de Anglais praised the magnificent defense of San Domingo by Toussaint and Rigaud and their army, and said that they deserved well of the country. Gourly, a colonial deputy, opposed the resolution without success, but he delivered a long address between the lines of which one could see the clause of restoration, and the convention had this document printed. The new constitution gave France the directory of 5 members and 2 heads on 2 houses, the Council of the Elders and the Council of 500. The 2 bodies elected a restricted franchise met in November 1795. The new bourgeoisie dominated both houses. The Jacobins, remember the Jacobins were the major people who went to overthrow the royalty, guillotine them. The Jacobins, weary and discredited, were in a minority. Vaublanc, who had fled in August the 10th, and a strong clique were members of the Council of 500, and the émigré colonists kept up a ceaseless agitation outside of Parliament for the restoration of order in the colonies. What this order, the blacks had no doubt as to the kind of order that the émigré colonists wished to restore. They did not say slavery openly. The revolution was still too near, but black San Domingo began to hear the page, and the friend of Brulé, Vaublanc, and other notorious enemies of colonial liberty were at once more active in France. The blacks could deal with local whites whose speech and actions hinted any return to slavery. The Republic they had always looked upon as their friend, but now, as they heard what was happening in France, and heard who were in the new Parliament, and what they were saying, their doubts grew, and they began to ask all strangers arriving in the colony from France if the Republic was as sincere in giving them liberty. So I think we're going to take a break now. We'll take a short break. This is the Afrocentricity Book Show. We are reading The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. We are on chapter 8 at the moment, so we're going to take a short break, okay? I'll be back shortly. Please remember that this show is sponsored by Glass R Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road. You can go to Glass R Us for all your glazing needs. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. That is 0208 800 6663. So we'll be taking a short break now, and we'll be back in a little while, with The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James.
Time is getting harder and harder, more and more each day, yeah. Still I am determined that I'm never gonna change my way. Thinking about love the way it should be. You gotta hope in your eyes and you will see about love the way it should be. You gotta make up your mind and you'll advance humanity. Humanity. Oh, what happened to the love that they are all talking about? Is nothing but useless words coming from out of their mouths, talking about love the way it should be. We gotta hope in our eyes and we will see about love the way it should be. We gotta make up our minds and we'll advance humanity. Humanity. Whoa. Whoa.
Even though we're oceans away, you're with me day by day. Memories of you keep flashing through my mind. The very thought of you make my time. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I'm feeling fine, and I hope you're fine too. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I hope when you hear these words, your grace turn blue, grace turn blue. Don't you worry now, I won't be long. Sweet paradise, I'm coming soon. When I'm with you, I can't be wrong. If not in May, then you'll see me in June. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I'm feeling fine, and I hope you're fine too. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I hope when you hear these words, your grace turn blue, grace turn blue. The sweetest things are there to be found. The golden sunshine, the wind that blows around, the fresh vegetation which comes from the earth. Oh, Mama Africa, you make me know what life is worth. Hey, hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I'm feeling fine, and I hope you're fine too. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I hope when you hear these words, your grace turn blue. Your grace turn blue.
Them never love the black shade. In the bleaching cream, them go bed. Love get caught within the system. Bleach, love for shave, love no stop trim. Stoop the big house and bling bling. No love themselves, so them bleach them skin. The lightning, see it clear the burn, brought up properly. Pain from both falling, in on them lane and them alley. Why bleach out to look like girl, and girl want to look like Dali. Lava splash from hill to the valley. Should dash a fire upon the bleach again. I want them no bleach and them good beat again. Skin no peel, can't touch the street again. A week and now them gone on the feet again. Are you waiting and dash a fire upon the bleach again? I want Keisha Paul and Pete again. Skin no peel, them can't touch the street again. Them get so weak and now them gone on the feet. Them say anything what black never need. So them start say your brown skin a do it. Now a pharmacy eyesight them all the read lightning. Them burn up themselves with the bleach. Them same one no said them not take no speech. Some a tell I about them rolling deep. And when them sight the sun them play hide and seek. Flesh get the power by the worm and leech. Up on a feet, try to shove fire upon the bleach again. I want them no bleach and them good beat again. Skin a peel, can't touch the street again. We can hold them gone on the feet again. Are you waiting and dash a fire upon the bleach again? Want them no bleach and them good beat again. Skin a peel, can't touch the street again. Them get so weak and hold them gone on the feet. Them set them better than the swine and the trunk row. Puss and dog get them stoop so low. I listen last, never teach them to live so. Gone astray themselves, they don't know. Them up life, get them noggin, no thanks for. Full of negligence, them no flourish and grow. Look what happen when the elders them bleach out. For the children, no eye sample, no show the rainbow. Never pitchy patchy like the bleach of them. I want them no bleach and them good beat again. Skin a feel, them can't get this street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Are you wine and dash a fire upon the bleach again? I want them to bleach and them go tweet again. School of feel them can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Love get caught within the system. Bleach not for shave, not no stop trim. Stupid big house and bling bling. No love themselves so them bleach them skin. A lightning, seed clear they burn, brought up properly. They promote falling in on them lane and them alley. Why bleach out will look like girl and girl one look like dolly. Love a splash from the hill to the valley. So dash a fire upon the bleach again. I want them to bleach and them go do it again. Skin a peel, them can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. I want a dash a fire upon the bleach again. I want Keisha Paul, even Peter them. Skin a peel, them can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Them say anything we black never leave. So them start say your brown skin a do it. Now a pharmacy eyesight them all a reach lightning. Them burn up themselves with the bleach. Them same one I said them not take no speech. I tell highway about them rolling deep. When them said the sun them play hide and seek. Flesh get the power by the road man leech up on a freak. Fire upon the bleach again. I want them to bleach and them go do it again. Skin up peel, can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Are you waiting? A dash of fire upon the bleach again.
Rastafari, that boy, na 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 na, Jah, Rastafari, na 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 na. Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I face a lot of trials and tribulation, but through all of that I man still stand strong, giving thanks and praise to the Almighty One, and looking forward to reach Mount Zion. And I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. They said I don't have no rights in a Babylon, because I don't know how the West was won. Neither I can't change their plan. The West is controlled by the Ku Klux Klan. That's why I say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Teach the youths them right, but not teach them wrong. Jackal up on the youths, cause the youths are strong. Look to Africa, that I feel your mama land. And down Africa, where you find Mount Zion. And I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Say, Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I care not what the people of this world want to say, neither what the people of this world want to do. Many are called, but the chosen are few. What you gonna do when Jaja call on you? I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Oh, Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I faced a lot of trials and tribulation, but through all of that I man still stand strong, still giving praise to the Almighty One, and looking forward to reach Mount Zion. And I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. The bingy man him says, Zion, I'm coming home to you. They said I don't have no rights in a Babylon, because I don't know how the West was won. Neither I can't change their plan. The West is controlled by the Ku Klux Klan. Rastaman Zion, I'm coming home to you. Rasta says, Zion, I'm coming home to you. One more time. Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I cannot what the people of this world want to say, neither this world want to do. Many are called, the chosen of few. What you gonna do when Jaja call on you? Rasta man says, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Holy Mount Zion.
Yes, greetings family. The Afrocentricity Book Show is back again. Hope you enjoyed those tunes. And the reason why I play some of those tunes are because Rastaman music, reggae music, man, it's the most beautiful music in the world. A lot of people like to talk a lot of things about Rasta and kind of that, but Rasta look back to Africa. Hope you realize that. And one of the reasons we have some issues within our community because we don't want to look to Africa. We're looking to here, we're looking to there, we're looking to Europe, we're looking to USA, we're looking all over, but we're not looking inside of ourselves, okay? This is the Afrocentricity Book Show, and the concept that we must look everything from our own center. We are African people, so we must look from our center, just like everybody else looks at their center. So one of the tunes I played was by I Wayne, called Bleaching, and they people bleaching up their skin. Why do people want to bleach their skin? Because they're looking at the world through other people's eyes. If they look for the world through their own eyes, you know that the melanin is the greatest thing that we have. The melanin is not only on the skin on the outside, it's in all of our organs as well. That last tune by Coco T, Holy Mount Zion, he's looking forward to go to Mount Zion. Where's Mount Zion? For the Rasta. Ethiopia. Again, they're looking back to Africa. That's our center. That's the only place we can go. It's the only place where we're loved. You know, when we look around the world, we don't have many friends, but, you know, about ourselves. When you look in the mirror, if you don't see anybody look friendly looking back at you, you're kind of in trouble, yeah? So we must always look at the world the correct way, yeah? And the correct way is really to look to Africa. That is our home, okay? I must tell you that Afrocentricity will be launching their first event in London, Afrocentricity International UK. We are holding an event at the Mama At Centre on the 28th. My apologies, the 27th. Wednesday, the 27th, at 7 p.m. at the Mama At Centre, which is 366A, High Road, Tottenham. We will be showing, complement this book what we're reading, 1804, The Hidden History of Haiti. So 1804 is created by the maker of the Hidden Colors documentary, which I'm sure you've seen, or I hope you've seen. You need to see Hidden Colors. I think there's at least five series of it. But Tariq Nasheed, he made the film documentary 1804, The Hidden History of Haiti. And Afrocentricity International will be showing a special screening for our family and friends, for our community, to be held on Wednesday the 27th of March 2019 at the Mama At Centre, 366A High Road, Tottenham, N17. So please make sure you're there. It's going to be a beautiful film, yeah? There's a seat for at least 100 people in this, so we really want to fill up this hall, yeah? Please tell your friends, 1804, The Hidden History of Haiti, on Wednesday, 27th of March, 7 to 9:30 p.m. at the Mama At Centre, which is 366A High Road, Tottenham, London, N17. So this is the Afrocentricity Book Show, and this is Brother Jegna. I'm here every Sunday between 4 and 6, reading the best books, lectures, essays, speeches. We look at the world through our own eyes is the key to this. And we are reading The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. And remember, this show is sponsored by Glass Are Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15. Please go to Glass Are Us for all your glazing needs. Tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, any of your glazing needs, double glazing, please go to them. If you mention this show, you'll get a 10% discount. So please get a pen ready for later on. But please remember, Glass Are Us, his number is 0208 800 88. So my apologies, 0208 800 6663. That is 0208 800 6663. So we are going to continue the Black Jacobins from where I left off, and this is really heating up now. So let me just say the background of where we are now. The island has fallen to the old rule, obviously the rule by all the colonists, all the slave masters from France. Again, I said earlier, this is the richest colony out of every colony. If you put all the British colonies together, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Barbados, This colony is richer than all of them put together. The money that this island created, which is now called Haiti, but it's called San Domingo at the time, it created some serious money. So the Africans rose up and freed themselves. However, Toussaint, one of the main leaders there, because France has said after the French Revolution that yes, everybody should free, they still see themselves as Frenchmen. They want to run the colony for France still, because France said it will give them freedom, liberty. This will change, but at the moment they are fighting off the British, because the British on the island, trying to enslave Africans again. The Spanish want to take over the island and fight them and reintroduce slavery again. So Toussaint and his troops are really fighting off all these people. Also the mulattoes, the mixed race people, they want to take control of the island as well, because they believe that they are the rightful rulers of the island. So you can see there's many different groups, many different intrigues going on. And this is where we are at the moment, okay? But Toussaint is rising and rising and rising. So I continue. The maritime bourgeoisie, this is obviously the people on the ships from France to the colonies, the maritime bourgeoisie and planters had made an infinite deal of mischief on the colonial question until the Paris masses gave the colony a chance to adapt itself to the new conditions. Now, as soon as they were coming into power again, they began with the old greed, dishonesty and tricks. The mischief that they would cause this time would be nothing as to what had been done between July 14th, 1789 and August 10th, 1792, when it was all over, that they would blame the revolutionaries. Sonothax easily had himself elected, but though he wanted to go, everybody begged him to stay. San Domingo was still unsettled, and his influence was strong. With the blacks, his name was already a talisman. And in an insurrection, which had took place on the Revolution Centre in Port-au-Bas, where the whites were massacred, the labourers had risen to cries of "Long live Sonothax! Long live Sonothax!" Obviously the blacks, like horses, dogs and cats, and some wild animals, judge a man not by the colour of his skin, but by the way he behaved. British agents were well supplied with money, and were always moving among them, stirring up strife and encouraging disorder. French royalists were doing the same. The situation was extremely uncertain, and all classes, white and black, asked Sonothax not to go. The municipality of Le Cap, mulatto and black officers, Clairvaux, Moise, Christophe, begged him to remain. Moise, supposed to be an implacable hater of the whites, told Sonothax that if he would resign as a colony, would most certainly be thrown into disorder. And at a meeting of the commissioners, Raymond, Leblanc and Gerard told him that if he went, they would not remain behind. They feared for their lives, so thus pressed, Sonothax stayed. Portrayed in France as the executioner of the whites and disruptor of the colony, he was in reality a rallying centre for the blacks and whites, so long as they were Republicans. But he was without mercy for the old slave owners, and these were the ones who were most clamorous in France. Toussaint too pressed him to stay, and far from having arranged the election of Sonothax in order to get rid of him, as is commonly urged, Toussaint told the Directory that the safety of the colony depended on Sonothax being left as commissioner, at least until peace with Britain was declared. Unfortunately, Sonothax, true representative of the revolution, was also the agent of the French Republic, sent to ensure that France and not the mulattoes should rule the colony. The mulatto stronghold was the South, and the Rigaud, who carried on the war against the British with such skill and vigour as to draw again and again praise from even the English Tory historian. By 1797, Rigaud was the master of a large part of the South. He had 6,000 men and a detachment of cavalry. Each battalion chief commanded a containment with absolute power, carrying out all civil and political functions. No black held rank above that of captain, and unlike Toussaint, Rigaud kept the whites in rigid subjection, excluding them from the very position of importance. Rigaud was undoubtedly narrow-minded. He wore always a brown wig with straight hair to give an appearance of that of a white man as possible. This sensitiveness to colour is usually accompanied in active men by great bitterness against the oppressing race and the narrowness of Rigaud's organisation. At his exclusion of whites and blacks from all positions of power undoubtedly owed something to his personal character. But fundamentally it lay in the very circumstance of the mulattoes. They were hopelessly outnumbered by the blacks. They were more than the illiterate blacks knew about the émigré propaganda and intrigues for the restoration of white supremacy. Toussaint did not trust the whites at all, but the blacks were so backward that he had to use the whites. The mulattoes were better equipped, though not all of them. They were educated, yet there were enough of them to govern, and if they established a mulatto oligarchy, not only the past events but future were to prove that the whites, at least the persons whose complaints should have been listened to. Rigaud and his followers had abandoned slavery, but they were hard on the black labourers. Let me say that the mulattoes were treated abominably by the whites, and that is why you could say the mulattoes did not have them, well, in the part of the island that controlled the south, did not have whites in position of power, or the blacks, because the whites could not trust them. The second that the whites saw that the mulattoes were rising, the whites massacred the mulattoes. So Rigaud, the leader of the mulattoes, were keeping power for themselves, but also because of their black blood, which they didn't like too much, they kept even the blacks away from position of power in the south. Toussaint was ruling blacks, he had whites, he had mulattoes, he had everybody in his army. So Toussaint was more of a wider, he looked at the bigger picture, shall we say. Rigaud and his followers had abandoned slavery, but they were hard on the black labourers. They made them understand that their freedom was due to the mulattoes. They confined them to the plantation, and Rigaud's prisons were filled with whites and blacks in irons, but never a single mulatto. He had as his chief advisor Pinochet, and they restored cultivation to such an extent that Rigaud never asked for any financial assistance from the French government and paid for his own ammunition. Yet he was a true friend of the Republic. He dismissed all the bribes the British offered him, and, unlike Toussaint, shot without mercy even mulattoes who intrigued with the British. Whatever Sonothack's instructions, he would have left Rigaud alone, at least until the peace. But an overconfident, he tackled Rigaud without the means to enforce his will. He had been long in the colony when he dispatched to the south a commission of 3, General Desfournais and Ray, 2 white men, and Leborn, a mulatto. Desfournais was to bring Rigaud's army under his own control. The commission was to restore equality among citizens of colour. In brackets, Sonothack's instructions were particularly stringent on this. It was to investigate whether the plot of March the 20th had any roots in the south, and it was to arrest Pinochet and bring him to Le Cap to account for his share of that conspiracy. Pinochet, who was the idol of the south and of the mulattoes all over the colony, Toussaint told Sonothack not to attempt such a thing. He and Rigaud respected and indeed had admiration for each other. Rigaud never had any personal jealousy of Toussaint because Toussaint was a Negro and cooperated against the British under Toussaint's orders. Toussaint thought that Sonothack should begin by having a conference. Above all, he warned Sonothack against sending Ray, who was an enemy of Rigaud, and had tried to assassinate him in Le Cays. Sonothack would not listen. Never was an expedition more certain of failure. and its adventures gave a useful idea of the social chaos which Tucson had to deal. Regard, though suspicious, welcomed the commission, treated them with the greatest respect. The commissioners duly noted the power which Regard and his officers exercised, but unminded by this, wherever they journeyed, they stirred up labourers against Regard's government, telling them that the mulattoes were oppressing them. Unrest among labourers and soldiers began wherever the commissioners passed. Their private conduct was unsatisfactory. They piled up great expenses and gambled for hours in private homes at which they stayed and entertained loose women in a loose way. Regard was engaged as a young woman. Marie Villeneuve, Ray seduced her, and when Regard came to see him, he told him smilingly, "Regard, I am going to introduce you to the most beautiful girl in Le Cays, but promise me to tell no one." Taking him into a bedroom, he drew the curtains of the bed and showed him Marie Villeneuve. Regard, a man of notoriously violent temperature, threw himself on Ray, knocked him down, and was about to hurl him over the balcony into the street when the servants rushed in and saved him. One of the commissioners stupidly asked Regard what he thought would happen if they arrested Pinchenet. Yet Regard and the mulattoes continued to show an exemplary patience. The delegation attempted an expedition against enemy territory. Desfonais, acting as a chief officer, would not take the advice of the local officers, and his column was badly beaten. Coming back in a temper, he arrested the treasurer of the South, as he had been ordered to do, and he also arrested a mulatto officer for some offence. While this officer was being conducted towards the harbour, he met a group of his own soldiers. He made a dash for safety, got safely among his own men, and the Syrian insurrection began. The European soldiers and National Guard stood by the government delegation, but the mulattoes all took the part of Regard. That night, Regard's brother raised the black labourers, who, however hard their lot, would always follow anyone who they thought was for them against slavery. Bouvet's, knowing that the commissioners were secretly or severely to blame by recognising their authority as representatives of the government, tried to make peace between the two parties. The mulattoes refused to listen to him and said that they would wait for Regard. Ray and Desfonais fled, and the mulattoes and the blacks, in full insurrection, massacred scores of whites, who of course were not all commissions. Le Bourge and Kerfosay, another European officer, were only saved because Bouveau, although powerless to stop the excitement, never left them for a single moment. Regard was the only man who could have restored calm, but Regard would not come. He was fond of the expression, "How terrible is the rage of the people." And when he heard of the massacre at Le Cays, all he would do is say this over and over again. At last, Kerfosay and Le Bon gave authority to Regard to re-establish quiet. Regard issued a proclamation stating that he had been officially put in control of the government, and immediately calm was restored. Le Bourg and Kerfosay left, and Regard remained master of the South. He and his people had been grossly provoked, but they were guilty of rebellion. Sonothax refused to receive the delegations from the municipality of Le Cays, sent to him to explain the unfortunate occurrences. The South tried Room, and other commissioner. Room also refused to listen. The municipality sent 2 whites to Paris to plead its case. When after some delay these 2 reached Paris, they turned against Regard and became his accusers instead of his defenders. Sonothax reorganized the geographical division of San Domingo so as to bring 2 districts of the South within the jurisdiction of the government. The inhabitants, spurred on by regard, drove out the officers whom Sonothax sent to take charge. Sonothax sent a condemnatory proclamation. The citizens of Lacaze dragged it through the street at the tail end of an ass. Pinchenet, elected among others as representative of the French Parliament for the South, was refused permission to sit when he reached Paris. The breach between the South and Rigaud and the government both in Saint Domingo and in France was complete, but Rigaud sent a representative to put his case to Toussaint. Sonothax heard of it and wanted to have him arrested. Toussaint refused and protected Rigaud's man. Thus, in the last months of 1796 and the beginning of 1797, Toussaint was in a close relationship with Rigaud, who was in a very uncertain position. The British, who had a good opportunity during all this confusion and might have conquered the colony then, they have ever been claimed that about this time Rigaud entered into negotiation with them. However that might be, the mulattoes repelled the Republic, drew nearer to the blacks under Toussaint, while Rigaud and his people looked upon Sonothax as their worst enemy. Toussaint maintained the friendliest relations with the commissioner, sought after by the blacks, mulattoes and whites. The suave and discreet Toussaint was gradually becoming the one man in San Domingo on whom everything hinged. Sonothax continued to rule with energy. His other colleagues, except Raymond, left him. Room was in Spanish San Domingo. Sonothax intrigued among the black generals, but solely for his own power and without designs for liberty. Rochambeau, a white general, objected to the wealth and dominance of the black generals, and Sonothax sent him home at once. Against white arrogance or white emigres, Sonothax was as fierce an enemy as any black labourer. He wanted to sweep the aristocrats off the face of the earth. Toussaint used to send assistance to his old master in the Americas, Bayeux de Libertas. He wanted to get him back, but he bowed to the law against the immigrants, and Sonothax was especially pleased at his instance of Toussaint's civism. Sonothax held frequent revolutionary demonstrations and made the children in the school spend many hours singing revolutionary hymns. Very interesting. But he worked also at the restoration of the colony. Le Cap was partially rebuilt, and cultivation began to flourish. On a plantation in the North Plain, a little African named Brossard had the confidence of both blacks and whites. He got the labourers to work on a promise of a fourth part of the produce, and he raised the capital to begin production again. The experiment was a great success, and plantations were farmed out of the government on this principle. Toussaint encouraged the generals and other notabilities to adopt this system, by which everybody, including the state, profited. Dessalines, in time, had 30 plantations farmed out to him. Toussaint popularized certain slogans by repeating them over and over again. "I do not wish to be any coast African" was one of them, referring to the primitive needs of the Africans from the slave coast. The guarantee of the liberty of the blacks is the prosperity of agriculture, was another saying on his lips, which spread among the blacks. Banditry, idleness, murder, these things still continued, as they continued in France, until the advent of Bonaparte. But torn and devastated as San Domingo still was, the colony had definitely taken an upward turn by the early months of 1797. Toussaint was appointed commander-in-chief and governor on the recommendation of Sonothax, who installed him in Le Cap with an imposing ceremony. The name of Sonothax was in the mouth of every black. Here an astonishing sight was a white man who protected the liberties and privileges of all, labourers and generals alike, as if he had once been a slave himself. So this is to remind you, this is the Afrocentricity Book Show. We are reading The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. On the 17th of August 1797, Toussaint went to Le Cap and called on Sonothax. After a few minutes there, he visited the commissioner, Ramond, and told him that the colony should be in a serious danger if Sonothax did not leave at once. He did not wish to use violence against Sonothax because of his official position, but Raymond, being his brother commissioner, should ask him to leave for Paris to take up his post as deputy. He said he could not give his reasons. Raymond was thunderstruck. As well as he might be, Toussaint and Sonothax were the best of friends. What had happened? He was also frightened. This is a very serious step with incalculable consequences. Next day, Toussaint told Raymond that Sonothax was preparing a catastrophe, that the whites who were still in San Domingo would be murdered. He accused Sonothax of wishing to raise the blacks against the whites. They argued with Toussaint fruitlessly and tried to point out to him the gravity of the step, which might lead to disorder and civil war on the colony, which was peaceful at last. Raymond and Pascal, General Secretary of the Commission, went to Sonothax and told him what they had heard. Toussaint then came, but Sonothax said he preferred to speak to Toussaint alone. Why? Sonothax failed to convince Toussaint and finally agreed to go in if Toussaint would give him a valedictory letter. Next day, Raymond and Pascal came again, and Toussaint, still keeping silence as to his reasons, told them of the proposed letter. The two went to Sonothax and came back with a draft which they asked Toussaint to sign, to get his staff to sign also. Toussaint summoned his officers and the letter was read to them, some of whom Sonothax had already got at and refused to sign. Others, wondering what this was all about, said they would wait to hear what were the intentions of the commissioner himself. Pascal ran to Sonothax and begged him to clear the air by saying what he intended to do, but Sonothax, on learning the attitude of his officers, refused to say anything and even seemed disposed to resist. Toussaint then told the officers they could sign if they wanted to or not, as they pleased. Sonothax, he said, wanted to go to France to take up his duty as a deputy, and had asked this letter. He had called them together to sign it and not to deliberate over it, as that would be against the law. Some signed, including Moise and Christophe. Others went away, of whom a few came backwards afterwards and wanted to sign. Toussaint would not allow it. He said that he was not begging them to oblige him. He was ready to sign the letter alone and take full responsibility. This was typical of Toussaint, who had been trained as a slave and then as a soldier. He never troubled to explain overmuch to subordinates. Their business was to obey. The letter was full of compliments to Sonothax for his work and for the urgency of someone like him being in France to defend the liberty of the blacks. Raymond took the letter with the signatures of Sonothax, to Sonothax, who replied with one another complimentary epistle. Toussaint, who always carried a diplomatic intrigue to the most ceremonial manner, replied with yet another. Sonothax had been given 3 days, but he sought to gain time, stirring up the officers friendly to him. One morning at 4 o'clock, Toussaint had the alarm cannon fired and sent General Adjay to tell Raymond that if Sonothax did not leave at once, he would enter the town and embark him by force. It was the end of Sonothax. Accompanied by his mistress, Raymond and some officers friendly to him, Sonothax traversed the streets of Le Cap on his way to the boat. The population watched him go, dumb with sorrow and bewilderment. He was immensely popular with all the blacks, but Toussaint said he was to go, and after that nothing could save him. What was behind this extraordinary episode? Unsolved enigma of the day. Toussaint's explanations, the secret that he guarded was that since the end of 1796, Sonothax had at various times suggested to him that he should massacre the whites and declare the colony independent. This was what Toussaint wrote in a long letter to the Directory, in which he gave an account in dramatic form of the various interviews of which Sonothax had made this proposal to him. Here is a part of the Toussaint story. He was installed as Commander-in-Chief on May the 2nd, 1797. On that day after the ceremony, he was mounting his horse to go back to Gonaves, when Sonothax stopped him, asked him into his house, and again broached the subject. I am very, very pleased. I am enchanted at seeing you, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the colony. We are in a position now to do exactly what we want. You have influence on all the inhabitants. It is an imperative for us to execute our project. This is the most suitable moment. Circumstances were never more favourable, and no one is better able to act than you and I. Toussaint replied, "That is to say, Commissioner, that you wish to destroy me, to kill all the whites, and make ourselves independent? Yet you had promised me that you would not speak to me again about these subjects." "Yes, but you see that it is absolutely indispensable." Thus goes on one page after page this curious dramatic dialogue, with the same actors, the same theme, but only time and place different. How much truth there was in it, nobody knows for certain. When Sonothax defended himself against this charge in Paris, he said that he had left San Domingo on his own free will, which was a lie. He claimed to have discovered a plot by priests and emigres, of which Toussaint was the instrument, to get rid of the commission. This was nonsense. He also accused Raymond of conspiring with Toussaint to invite him by means of the letter to leave France. Both Pascal and Raymond could easily refute this statement. If anyone should be accused of independence, said Sonothax, it should be Toussaint. And he charged Toussaint with being surrounded by emigre whites, with organising the revolt. In 1791, with the fighting for the Spanish king and leaving him only when he heard of the negotiations for peace and knew that the King of Spain would not need him any longer. All this was partly lies, yes, partly nonsense. If Sonothax were not guilty, his defence was a poor one. It is no easier to understand Toussaint's side either. He was certainly lying when he portrayed himself as being angry with Sonothax for making such a treacherous proposal. Up until a few days before his visit to Le Cap, he and Sonothax were, or had been, close friends. Since the end of 1796, Sonothax had made these proposals to him. On February the 1st, 1797, he had written to the minister, asking him not to believe the insinuations that Sonothax and Raymond were betraying the interests of France, and asked that Sonothax should remain. The safety of San Domingo, its entire restoration, demands that the Directory should not permit him to return. My attachments to France, the love of the fatherland, and my brothers oblige me to make the request to you. On June the 15th, in a letter to Sonothax, Toussaint signed himself "Friendship without end." On June 16th, he wrote to Mentor another black, that the measures of the commission had been all approved. However joyful Sonothax would be, I will be glad to be near him, to embrace him, and to tell him of my satisfaction. This satisfaction makes me forget for a moment my vexations. Yet a few weeks later, to the astonishment of everyone, he was insisting that with all the strength in his unbreakable will that Sonothax was to go. Nothing that happened in San Domingo can explain this. The explanation, as with so much of the history of San Domingo, must be sought in France. What was happening there changed Toussaint's views, and with them the cause of the Black Revolution. In France, my apologies, the planters in the Paris of 1797 were merely a noisy, if not quite as powerful as they had been in 1791. The revolution in France was dead. Babeuf had arrived at the conclusion that political equality could only be achieved by a drastic change in the economic organization. The Directory's police reported that working men and women were eagerly reading Babeuf's writings. But the fighting enthusiasm of the old days had been broken by defeat and disappointment. Babeuf's attempt failed miserably, and the bourgeoisie took advantage of the reaction to stabilize itself. Respectable Jacobin deputies, who had probably never heard the name of Babeuf until he was captured, were accused of terrorism and anarchy, and of the 216 former members of the convention who were due to retire in March 1797, scarcely a dozen were re-elected. So far had been the reaction gone that the president of the elders was Barbé du Mabois, the intendant who had been chased from San Domingo by the patriots in 1789. Vablanc and his party therefore immensely reinforced after the new elections, carried on as in the good old days. Why are the blacks armed? Asked Bourdon. To destroy all parties? The unfortunate white colonists had decreased from 40,000 to 25,000. Some days later, Bourdon gave a new message to the Directory about the massacres and denounced the official report of lie as lies. Why were the whites in San Domingo suffering? The Directory was pardoning royalists in France. Of 1,500 requests for restoration of the rights of the émigrés, only 166 had been rejected. Yet in the colonies this persecution was going on. At last, in May, the Directory was able to send a message to San Domingo. It was from Toussaint. Hatred of the English, he said, had united all parties. The English had put the crown on their atrocities by inventing cuirasses studded with sharp-pointed pieces of steel which they threw among the Republican soldiers when it came to hand-to-hand fighting, knowing that most of the blacks were barefooted. But this hateful device has only turned out to their shame. Our soldiers have defied these weapons, and with an unconquerable rage have proved that no obstacle is able to stop men carrying arms for liberty. At this stirring message, an eche from an age still lingered faintly in the ears. The deputies broke into enthusiastic applause and demanded that it should be printed, but Vablanc raged and stormed, and he said the whole was a pack of lies, nothing could be more ridiculous. And in May 27th, he made the fiercest attack yet to be made on Sonothax. He is covered with the blood of whites. He has made atrocious laws, which the tigers of Libya would not make if tigers had the misfortune to need laws. He had raised impositions, he had pocketed vast sums of which he has given on no account. All of this was untrue. If Sonothax had whites killed, it would have been in defense of the Republic. He had not stolen any money. To the end of his days, he remained a poor man. It was his legislation in favour of blacks that was driving Verblanc and the colonists wild. Verblanc blamed Sonothax and Lavaux of having contributed most to the spirit of his insubordination among the blacks. Day after day he abused Sonothax with the blacks whose, in commas, in brackets, those blacks without whom the colony would assuredly have been British. Barbe accused the labourers of being passive and servile instruments of Sonothax, or of Sonothax's crimes. De La Haye said that San Domingo needed a new agent with an imposing force. On June the 1st, the Directory sent a message to the house from Raymond describing all that was being done for cultivation. Bourdon said it was a pack of lies, and that the proprietors were being chased away, and that the commissioners were putting the money in their pockets. For Blanc said that the same boat which brought Raymond's dispatch had brought Marshal Besse, a Creole general, who said that the colony was in the wildest disorder. He asked for the recall of Sonothax. Géron Coulon defended Sonothax, but finally a motion proposed by Verblanc and Villa Joyeuse was carried by an enormous majority, and on June the 3rd the House decided on the recall of Raymond, Room and Sonothax. In the course of his speech, Villeray-Joyeuse said that the military regime was the only one which could save San Domingo and save the unhappy whites from the daggers of the blacks. He and Verblanc demanded that San Domingo should be put in a state of siege until the peace. On June the 12th, the Council of Elders approved the motion for the recall. Sonothax most certainly had friends in France who kept him informed. Toussaint, we know, had his private agents. But even without these special sources of information, San Domingo knew that for the news was appearing day by day in the Monitor, the official journal. The Monitor on June the 12th carried an announcement of a letter from Lord G to the Directory requesting a passport for an English representative to Paris to discuss terms of peace. Peace had been in the air for a long time. If terms of peace were being discussed, then France might soon be able to devote attention to San Domingo and to send troops. Sonothax knew the strength of the counter-revolution in France. He could see exactly where the steady growing reaction would end. He himself would lose his head, and the colony would ultimately be restored to slavery. He might have not expressed himself so freely to Toussaint as Toussaint described in his dispatch, but it is not impossible that, sick and tired of the reaction and fearing for the future, he had proposed to Toussaint that they should seize the colony, purge it of the white slave owners, and make it independent. Toussaint, very careful, would reject these advances, while bearing Sonothax, friend of the blacks, no ill will for them. But sometime in July, Toussaint got news of the decree recalling Sonothax, and the reception which the speeches of Verblanc, Barbe, and others had got. There was obviously a terrific struggle ahead, and he and his allies Rigaud, in disgrace with the Directory, would have to fight. With his usual decision, the Directory would have to fight, but with his usual decision made up his mind to throw Sonothax to the wolves at once. What other reason could be assigned to the violent about-face? Whatever the reasons for his dismissal of Sonothax, the fact itself was of enormous significance. Henceforth, the French government suspected Toussaint of a design to make the colony independent, and Toussaint feared the intention of the French to restore slavery. The Directory itself had no intention of restoring slavery. But the Directory might continue in power, and no one knew what its successors would do. It is from this time that Toussaint, driven by events, envisaged the necessity of holding on to power, even at the cost of defying France. How acutely had he foreseen the course of French politics was proved by the events in the next few months. For the men who are now reaping the fruits of the revolution, the restoration of order in San Domingo were the only one item in general, a wave of reaction. They were forcing on the French as fast as they could. They admitted deputies, hitherto ineligible, suppressed the revolutionary clubs, revoked the laws relating to the deportations and dismissals of priests who would not take the oath to the Republic. They reorganized the National Guard in such a manner as to exclude the more democratic elements, but they were going too fast. Some of their chiefs were even intriguing with the royalty, and the new bourgeoisie did not want royalty and feudalism back again. Even the weary and cheated masses would support their new masters against those outworn and discredited creeds. The Directory was watching this tide of reaction, and itself rotten with corruption, was powerless to stop it. Suddenly, it got the proofs of a royalist conspiracy and decided to use them against these brazen relics of the ancient regime. Whether royalists or no, on the night of the 18th, or September the 3rd, I should say, they were arrested. A coup d'etat banished 65 of them to the Guianas and checked for a time the descent of the revolution. Among the 65 were Vaublanc, Villaret, Barbe, de Marseille, Bourdon, Dulahaye, and Dumas. All of them implacable enemies to the new regime in San Domingo. Black freedom was saved for a time, but Toussaint had a serious shock. On November the 5th, he addressed a letter to the Directory, which was a milestone in his career. So I think I'm going to leave it there, and we'll continue next week. We just come to the end of the show now. So yeah, this has been Afrocentricity Book Show. We are on chapter 8 of the Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. We'll be back again next week. Always remember, what we do for ourselves depends on what we think of ourselves. And what we think of ourselves depends on what we know about ourselves. And what we know about ourselves depends on what we are taught about ourselves. So this is why the Afrocentricity Book Show will bring you the truth. So we can make our own views, we can make our own decisions, we can look at the world through our own eyes. So this has been Afrocentricity Book Show. We'll be back again next week. So you have a great week, and I'll talk to you all again next week. One love.
Cue me, or are you gonna tell me when to drive one in? Or you just gonna set it up? What you feeling down for? No, I like that. I like that.
Grammy. Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. Listen. Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Look around and then I see a little old man and a homeless lady. They don't have no food to eat. Father, give them a warm place to sleep. Come on, wake up the people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up. Wake up, people, wake up now. Storms will come and storms will go. The earth may quake and still the souls of the ones we love, and some will die.
Some shall
But
die.
they're in heaven, so dry your eyes.
Dry your eyes.
Celebrate life.
Don't you cry.
Jump for joy.
Jump for joy.
Like a baby with a toy.
Little baby.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Dry your eyes.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up now.
Don't you cry.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. Wake up now. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up now.
Wake up. The storms will come and the storms will go. The earth may quake.